You think corned beef and cabbage was just Irish immigrant food? Think again. Black kitchens across America transformed this humble combination into something extraordinary during the 1970s. Let's dig into 30 corned beef and cabbage recipes that define real soul food. Classic Sunday corned beef and cabbage was the centerpiece of countless African American dinner tables during the 1970s, a dish that brought families together and filled homes with rich, savory aromas. The corned beef was simmered low and slow until tender enough to shred with a fork, while the cabbage softened in the meat's broth until it absorbed every drop of flavor. Families served it alongside cornbread or buttered potatoes, stretching the meal to feed everyone. The dish was both affordable and filling, making it practical for households on tight budgets. Children grew up expecting it every Sunday, while adults valued its reliability and warmth. It was not fancy, but it carried pride and comfort in every bite. Classic Sunday corned beef and cabbage was more than dinner. It was tradition, memory, and the taste of home. Corned beef hash with fried cabbage was Monday morning's answer to Sunday's leftovers, a dish that turned scraps into something families look forward to. The corned beef was chopped into small cubes and fried in a cast iron skillet with diced potatoes and onions until crispy edges formed, while shredded cabbage was added and cooked until caramelized. The combination created a symphony of textures: crispy meat, tender potatoes, and sweet cabbage mingling together. Topped with a fried egg, its runny yolk became natural gravy. This dish was about making the most of what remained. Families understood that wasting food was unacceptable, and this hash proved that creativity could transform leftovers into a meal worth remembering. The smell of it frying filled kitchens with warmth. Corned beef and cabbage soup was the kind of dish that stretched a little into a lot, feeding large families on cold winter evenings when warmth mattered as much as flavor. The broth was built from bones and trimmings of corned beef, simmered for hours with bay leaves, peppercorns, and onion until it developed rich depth. Chunks of tender corned beef joined wedges of cabbage, carrots, and potatoes, creating a soup hearty enough to serve as a complete meal. Families ladled it into deep bowls and served it with thick slices of cornbread for soaking up every drop. The soup could be reheated for days, improving each time. It represented the wisdom of making one piece of meat feed a family for an entire week, stretching resources without sacrificing satisfaction. Fried corned beef and cabbage patties were one of those clever creations that turned leftovers into something children actually asked for by name. Leftover corned beef was shredded fine and mixed with mashed potatoes, finely chopped cabbage, eggs, and seasoning until it held together in thick patties. These were dredged in flour and fried in bacon grease until golden brown and crispy on both sides while staying soft inside. The patties were served hot with mustard or hot sauce, creating a handheld meal perfect for lunch boxes or quick dinners. Mothers valued these patties because they used up every scrap while creating something new. The crispy exterior gave way to tender, flavorful filling with each bite. These patties proved that economical cooking could be just as delicious as anything bought fresh. Corned beef cabbage rolls were a Sunday specialty that required patience but delivered comfort worth every minute of preparation. Large cabbage leaves were blanched until pliable, then wrapped around a filling of shredded corned beef mixed with rice, onions, and seasonings. The rolls were nestled in a baking dish covered with tomato sauce and baked slowly until the cabbage became silky. The tomato sauce caramelized at the edges, adding sweetness that balanced the salty meat. These rolls appeared at church suppers and family dinners, where they were greeted with appreciation for the effort they represented. Children learned to make them by watching their mothers carefully wrap each roll. Corned beef cabbage rolls showed how one cut of meat could be transformed through care into something elegant. Corned beef and cabbage stew was the kind of one-pot meal that simmered all afternoon, filling the house with anticipation. Chunks of corned beef were browned first for extra flavor, then covered with water and simmered with cabbage wedges, potatoes, carrots, and onions until fork tender. The broth thickened naturally from the starches in the potatoes, creating gravy that clung to every piece. Families served it in deep bowls with plenty of bread for soaking. The stew was especially popular during winter months when something warm and substantial was needed to fight the cold. It could feed a crowd and tasted even better the second day when the flavors had deepened overnight. Corned beef and cabbage stew was honest food, unpretentious but deeply satisfying and always welcome. Corned beef and cabbage with potlikker was a dish that honored the Southern tradition of saving every drop of cooking liquid. After the corned beef was boiled tender, the remaining broth, rich with meat juices, salt, and fat, became precious potlikker, never discarded. Cabbage was simmered directly in this liquid until it absorbed the meaty essence, turning soft and deeply flavored. Families served the cabbage in shallow bowls with the potlikker spooned over top, accompanied by cornbread for dunking. The liquid itself was considered nourishing, often given to children for strength. This practice reflected deep understanding that nutrition existed in every part of the cooking process. Saving and using potlikker was not just frugal, it was wise. The dish carried generations of knowledge. Corned beef and cabbage skillet was the quick weeknight answer for busy mothers who needed dinner on the table fast. Sliced corned beef was fried in a hot skillet until the edges crisped and browned, then joined by shredded cabbage that wilted down quickly in the rendered fat. Onions and garlic added depth while cooking in just minutes. The entire dish came together in one pan in under half an hour, making it practical for households where time was precious. Served over rice or with bread, it was filling and flavorful despite its simplicity. Children loved the crispy bits of meat scattered throughout the soft cabbage. The skillet method proved that good food did not require hours of cooking, just smart technique. It became a standby in kitchens where efficiency and flavor had to coexist. Corned beef and cabbage casserole was the dish that turned leftovers into company food, layered and baked until bubbly and golden. Sliced corned beef lined the bottom of a buttered baking dish, covered with a layer of sautéed cabbage, then topped with creamy mashed potatoes. Some families added cheese for extra richness. The casserole baked until the edges crisped and the layers melded together into something greater than their parts. It was made for potlucks and church suppers where it traveled well and served easily. The presentation elevated humble ingredients into something impressive. Children often preferred the casserole to boiled dinner because of the crispy edges and creamy texture. Corned beef and cabbage casserole represented the transformation of necessity into celebration. Corned beef with creamed cabbage was a dish that brought richness to an otherwise straightforward combination, creating something that felt almost luxurious. The cabbage was shredded and cooked slowly in a mixture of butter, flour, and milk until silky and tender, bathed in velvety cream sauce. Sliced corned beef was arranged on plates with generous spoonfuls of the creamed cabbage alongside. The cream sauce mellowed the cabbage's sharpness, while the salty meat provided contrast. This preparation appeared at Sunday dinners when something refined was called for. It showed that simple ingredients could be elevated through technique without adding expense. Children who normally refused plain cabbage cleaned their plates when served this way. Corned beef with creamed cabbage was comfort food dressed up for company. Corned beef and cabbage with black-eyed peas was a fusion dish that married Irish-American tradition with African-American soul food staples. The corned beef was sliced thin and layered over simmered black-eyed peas cooked with onions, garlic, and ham hock for smokiness. Shredded cabbage was wilted in the potlikker from the peas, absorbing that earthy, savory flavor. The combination provided complete protein and stretched the meat further than it could go alone. Families served this, especially on New Year's Day when black-eyed peas symbolized luck. The salty corned beef played beautifully against the creamy peas and tender cabbage. It was a dish born of necessity and cultural blending that became beloved in its own right. This combination showed how African American cooks transformed ingredients into something uniquely their own. Corned beef and cabbage sandwiches were the lunch counter staple that turned dinner leftovers into handheld perfection. Thick slices of corned beef were piled high on rye bread with soft braised cabbage and a generous smear of mustard. Some families added Swiss cheese and grilled the whole thing until the bread crisped and cheese melted. The sandwiches were hearty enough to fuel a full day's work and portable enough for lunch pails carried to factories. Children begged for them in their school lunches, proud to unwrap something so substantial. The combination of tender meat, sweet cabbage, and tangy mustard created perfect balance in every bite. These sandwiches proved that leftovers could become something entirely new, something worth looking forward to rather than just finishing up. Corned beef and cabbage with cornbread dumplings was a dish that stretched one pot into a complete meal, requiring nothing else on the table. The corned beef simmered in seasoned broth with cabbage wedges until tender, then spoonfuls of cornbread batter were dropped directly into the bubbling liquid. The dumplings puffed up and cooked through, absorbing the rich broth while maintaining their cornmeal texture. Families ladled everything into deep bowls: meat, cabbage, dumplings, and plenty of broth. The dumplings turned soup into something more substantial, filling bellies that needed fuel for hard work. This was made when bread was running low or when something different was needed. It showed the ingenuity of cooks who understood that starch could come from many places, adding Southern character to an already beloved combination. Smothered corned beef and cabbage was the dish that proved even already tender meat could benefit from more time in the pot. Sliced corned beef was layered with cabbage in a Dutch oven, covered with gravy made from the cooking liquid thickened with flour and enriched with butter. The pot was covered tightly and cooked low until the cabbage became silky and the gravy reduced to a glossy coating. The smothering technique came straight from Southern cooking tradition, transforming a simple combination into something deeply comforting. Families served it over rice or with biscuits to catch every drop. The dish required patience, but rewarded it with flavors that melded completely together. Smothered corned beef and cabbage was Sunday cooking at its finest, unhurried, intentional, and utterly satisfying. Corned beef and cabbage with sweet potatoes was a combination that brought natural sweetness to balance the salt of the meat. Chunks of sweet potato were added to the pot during the last hour of cooking, absorbing the briny broth while maintaining their structure. The cabbage and sweet potatoes cooked together, their sugars caramelizing slightly. Families served everything in shallow bowls, ensuring each portion had meat, cabbage, and orange fleshed potato. The combination was popular in Southern households where sweet potatoes were garden staples. Children who might refuse plain cabbage ate it happily when sweet potato was involved. This variation showed how African American cooks adapted recipes to include affordable ingredients. Sweet potatoes turned corned beef and cabbage into something that felt native to the South. Corned beef and cabbage pie was the kind of dish that transformed leftovers into something that looked like it took all day. A buttery pie crust lined a deep dish filled with layers of chopped corned beef, sautéed cabbage, onions, and diced potatoes bound with eggs and cream. The top crust was crimped and vented, then baked until golden brown and the filling set firm. Sliced into wedges, it served beautifully at dinner tables and traveled well to potlucks. The pie elevated humble ingredients into something that commanded attention. Families made it when company was coming or when leftovers needed to become something special. Each slice contained all the flavors of the original dish in portable, impressive form. Corned beef and cabbage pie showed that presentation mattered and creativity could transform anything. Corned beef and fried cabbage with bacon was the dish that added smokiness and extra richness to an already satisfying combination. Bacon was rendered first in a cast iron skillet, then removed while the fat remained. Shredded cabbage was fried in that bacon grease until it wilted and picked up golden edges. Sliced corned beef was added to warm through, then crumbled. Bacon returned to the pan. Everything was tossed together and served immediately while still sizzling. The bacon added another layer of pork flavor that complemented the corned beef perfectly. This was not health food. It was soul food, meant to satisfy completely. Families served it as a main dish with cornbread or as a hearty side. The combination of two cured porks with sweet cabbage created something irresistible. Corned beef and cabbage with rice and gravy was the plate lunch special that filled workers up and kept them going until supper. A mound of white rice was topped with sliced corned beef and braised cabbage, then covered generously with gravy made from the cooking liquid. The gravy soaked into the rice, flavoring every grain while the cabbage and meat provided substance. This was cafeteria food, blue plate special food served at diners and lunch counters across Black neighborhoods. It was affordable, filling, and deeply satisfying. Workers ordered it, knowing exactly what they would get: consistency and comfort. The rice stretched the meal further while the gravy tied everything together. Corned beef and cabbage with rice was everyday food that people genuinely loved and looked forward to ordering. Corned beef and cabbage stuffed peppers were the colorful dish that turned leftovers into something that looked planned and intentional. Bell peppers were hollowed out and filled with a mixture of chopped corned beef, shredded cabbage, rice, and tomato sauce, then baked until the peppers softened. The peppers provided natural containers that made portioning easy and presentation attractive. Each person got their own stuffed pepper, complete with all the flavors of corned beef and cabbage. Families made these when they wanted something different from the usual preparations. The tomato sauce added brightness that complemented the salty meat. Children often ate these more willingly than loose cabbage on a plate. Stuffed peppers showed that familiar flavors could be presented in new ways that excited rather than bored. Corned beef and cabbage with mustard greens was the variation that added bitter complexity to the familiar combination. Mustard greens were cooked down in corned beef broth alongside the cabbage, their sharp bite mellowing but never disappearing. The bitterness balanced the salt of the meat and the sweetness of braised cabbage, creating a more sophisticated flavor profile. Families who grew mustard greens added them naturally to whatever was cooking. The combination provided extra nutrition and made the pot stretch further. Potlikker from this version was especially prized, carrying the minerals and vitamins from the greens. This variation showed how African American cooks incorporated what grew readily into whatever they were making. Mustard greens added character and nutrition to an already beloved dish. Corned beef and cabbage with collard. Greens was the dish that doubled down on leafy vegetables, creating a pot rich with Southern tradition. Collard greens were added to the cooking liquid alongside the cabbage, their sturdy leaves standing up to the long simmer. The collards absorbed the salty, meaty broth and became silky while maintaining their distinct flavor. Families who always had collards in the garden naturally added them to stretch the meal further. The combination of two greens with corned beef was especially nourishing and filling. Potlikker from this version was dark and rich, packed with vitamins. This variation showed how Southern traditions naturally merged with other culinary influences to create something familiar and new. Collards made the dish feel completely at home in the South. Corned beef and cabbage egg rolls were the inventive creation that wrapped familiar flavors in crispy shells. Shredded corned beef and finely chopped cabbage were seasoned and rolled tightly in egg roll wrappers, then fried until golden and crackling. The exterior shattered with each bite, giving way to the savory filling inside. These appeared at parties where finger food was needed, offering something unexpected that still tasted like home. Families made them when they wanted to impress guests or give children something fun to eat. The dipping sauce varied. Some used mustard, others hot sauce or sweet chili. Egg rolls showed how African American cooks adapted techniques from other cuisines while keeping flavors rooted in tradition. They proved that familiar ingredients could take entirely new forms. Corned beef and cabbage with lima beans was the combination that added creamy texture and extra protein to the pot. Large lima beans were simmered alongside the cabbage in the corned beef broth until they became soft and buttery. The beans absorbed the salty liquid and provided substance that made the dish even more filling. Families who grew lima beans in their gardens added them naturally to whatever was simmering. The combination was especially popular in rural areas where dry beans were pantry staples that stretched meals through lean times. Children who might complain about plain limas ate them willingly when they tasted of corned beef. This variation showed the resourcefulness of cooks who understood how to make one pot feed many. Lima beans turned corned beef and cabbage into something heartier and more complete. Corned beef and cabbage fried rice was the dish that gave Asian technique a soul food twist, using leftover ingredients to create something entirely new. Day-old rice was fried in a hot wok or skillet with chopped corned beef, shredded cabbage, eggs, and green onions until everything was slightly crispy and fragrant. Soy sauce or Worcestershire added depth while the cabbage provided sweetness. This dish appeared in households where creativity meant survival and leftovers became tomorrow's dinner. It was quick to prepare and satisfying, perfect for busy weeknights when time was short. Children loved the crispy rice bits scattered throughout. Corned beef and cabbage fried rice showed how African American cooks borrowed freely from other traditions while making dishes their own. It was fusion before fusion had a name. Corned beef and cabbage with navy beans was the hearty combination that turned one pot into a complete meal of protein and vegetables. Small white navy beans were simmered in the corned beef broth until creamy, their mild flavor absorbing the salty, meaty liquid. Cabbage wedges cooked alongside until tender, creating a dish that was both filling and nutritious. Families valued this combination because dried beans were cheap and stored well, making them reliable additions to any pot. The navy beans broke down slightly, thickening the broth into something almost like gravy. This dish was often made in large batches that fed families for days, reheating beautifully each time. It represented the wisdom of stretching resources while maintaining flavor and satisfaction. Navy beans made corned beef and cabbage substantial enough to stand alone. Corned beef and cabbage with okra was the southern variation that added texture and flavor unique to the region. Fresh okra was sliced and added to the pot during the last 30 minutes of cooking, releasing its natural thickening agents into the broth. The okra became tender but maintained its shape, providing a vegetable that children either loved or learned to tolerate. Families who grew okra in their gardens added it to everything, including corned beef and cabbage. The dish became slightly thicker and more complex with the okra's subtle flavor. Some cooks fried the okra separately, first to reduce the sliminess, then added it to the pot. This variation showed how regional ingredients naturally found their way into adopted recipes, making them feel like they had always belonged together. Corned beef and cabbage with turnips was the root vegetable variation that added earthiness and stretched the meal further. Turnips were peeled and cubed, then simmered in the broth alongside potatoes and cabbage until fork tender. Their slightly bitter, peppery flavor balanced the salt of the meat and the sweetness of the cooked cabbage. Families who grew turnips valued them for their storage ability and nutritional content. The root vegetables absorbed the meaty broth, becoming deeply flavored and satisfying. Children sometimes needed convincing, but the turnips cooked this way were far more appealing than when served alone. This variation showed how cooks used whatever grew in the garden to extend meals without sacrificing flavor. Turnips added the character and substance to an already beloved dish. Corned beef and cabbage with hot pepper vinegar was the condiment pairing that added brightness and heat to every bite. Hot pepper vinegar, made by steeping hot peppers in white vinegar for weeks, was drizzled over the finished dish at the table. The acid cut through the richness of the meat, while the heat provided a slow burn that built with each forkful. Bottles of hot pepper vinegar sat on tables throughout the South as essential as salt and pepper. Families passed them around, each person adding as much or as little as they preferred. The vinegar also helped preserve appetite, making food taste fresh and vibrant even as leftovers. This pairing showed how simple condiments could transform familiar dishes into something exciting. Hot pepper vinegar turned corned beef and cabbage into something that woke up the palate. Corned beef and cabbage with hominy was the combination that added chewy texture and corn flavor to the pot. Canned or dried hominy was simmered alongside the cabbage in the corned beef broth until heated through and infused with meaty flavor. The large, puffy corn kernels provided a different texture than potatoes, their slight chewiness contrasting with the tender meat and soft cabbage. Families who kept hominy in the pantry added it to soups and stews as a matter of course. The corn flavor complemented the salt of the corned beef while making the dish feel more southern. Children often picked out the hominy, enjoying its unique texture. This variation showed how pantry staples naturally found their way into whatever was cooking, creating new traditions from available ingredients. Corned beef and cabbage with dill was the herb variation that added brightness and freshness to the familiar combination. Fresh or dried dill was stirred into the pot during the final minutes of cooking, its distinctive flavor permeating the broth and clinging to the vegetables. The herbs' slight licorice note complemented the salt of the meat and cut through the richness. Families who grew dill in their gardens added it to everything from pickles to soups. The combination was especially refreshing in warmer months when something lighter was craved. Dill also appeared as a garnish, scattered fresh over the finished dish for color and aroma. This variation showed how a single
Sweet pepper and beef smothered rice was a meal your grandparents made when they needed color, warmth, and comfort all in one pot without spending much. It began with ground beef browning in a sturdy skillet, releasing just enough fat to soften the onions and garlic. Then came the sweet peppers, sliced into strips that brightened both the pan and the mood. As they softened, their gentle sweetness blended into the savory beef. A pot of rice cooked quietly on the back burner, fluffy and ready to carry the meal. Once combined, each grain absorbed the seasoned juices and pepper flavor. Your grandparents seasoned it by feel, adding paprika, hot sauce, or broth depending on what the week allowed. Some versions added tomatoes, others kept things simple, but every variation carried the same warmth. Children scraped their plates clean because the dish was hearty without being heavy, and adults loved how far it stretched. Sweet pepper and beef smothered rice was a reminder that simple ingredients, handled with care, could make a supper feel complete. Molasses milk drink was a common way to stretch both sweeteners and dairy during times of hardship. Hot milk, often reconstituted from powdered milk, was whisked with a spoonful of molasses until warm and smooth. The result was a drink that children could have before school or adults could sip before long workdays. It carried natural sweetness and important nutrients from molasses, while offering comfort when sugar was too costly to use. Families appreciated it because it was affordable, easy to prepare, and nourishing. Many children who grew up during lean times remembered this drink as both a treat and a necessity, even if they preferred chocolate or sugar when they could get it. The molasses milk drink proved that small substitutions could keep sweetness alive in daily life without breaking ration limits. It was simple, practical, and tied directly to the struggles of everyday survival, becoming a quiet but important memory of perseverance. Beef and potato hash was the master of second chances. It began as a way to save leftovers from Sunday dinner and ended as breakfast that could make anyone smile. Ground beef and diced potatoes fried together in a skillet until golden and crisp, seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and sometimes a little onion or hot sauce. The edges crackled, the smell was irresistible, and the flavor was pure comfort. It was the kind of meal you could eat any time of day, morning, noon, or midnight. For working families, it was a quick fix that still felt full and satisfying. You could feed 6 with just a handful of ingredients, and no one left the table hungry. Hash was proof that waste was not in the vocabulary of a wise cook. Every bite tasted like resourcefulness and care, the kind of wisdom only learned from years of making do. The skillet did not just fry food, it told stories of survival. Cornbread-topped beef pie was the kind of dish that made an ordinary evening feel special, even when the ingredients were humble. Your grandparents started by browning the ground beef with onions and garlic until the mixture turned savory and fragrant. Vegetables followed, often whatever could be found in the pantry or pulled from the garden. The filling simmered into a warm, hearty base that could have stood on its own. But the cornbread batter poured over the top transformed it, baking into a golden crust that was tender on the bottom and crisp on the surface. The smell filled the house with a sense of abundance, even in hard times. Your grandparents cut generous squares, each serving carrying the perfect blend of sweet cornbread and savory beef. Cornbread-topped beef pie proved that simple ingredients, handled with care, could feel like a celebration. Shrimp cocktail served in small cups with tangy cocktail sauce was elegant finger food that made children feel sophisticated. The cold, tender shrimp dipped in spicy sweet sauce, creating flavors that seemed fancy. Mothers would boil shrimp in seasoned water with Old Bay seasoning, lemon, and bay leaves until they turned pink and curled, then plunge them into ice water to stop the cooking. Once chilled, the shrimp were peeled and deveined, their tails left on for easy handling, then arranged around small cups filled with cocktail sauce made from ketchup, horseradish, lemon juice, and Worcestershire sauce. The cocktail sauce had a sharp, tangy kick that balanced the shrimp's natural sweetness, creating combinations that felt restaurant quality. In the 1970s, Black households, shrimp cocktail represented luxury and celebration, an appetizer that elevated holiday gatherings. Children loved shrimp cocktail because they could hold the shrimp by the tail and dip them like French fries. Creole beef and rice skillet was what you made when you needed to feed a family quick but wanted it to taste like home. Ground beef sizzled with bell pepper, celery, and onion, the holy trinity of Southern cooking. A little paprika, a pinch of cayenne, and suddenly the air smelled like Louisiana itself. This one-pan supper was the kind of dish that brought rhythm to a weekday, quick to make yet full of heart. The rice soaked up all that spice and tomato, turning a simple skillet into something rich and layered. You could hear the sizzle, see the color, and know dinner was done. It was a meal built for families that worked hard and came home hungry. Proof that you did not need a feast to make people smile. Creole beef and rice was everyday genius, a way to bring big flavor out of small means. Now it sits in old church cookbooks and memories, waiting for someone to give it another turn on the stove. Creole ground beef and rice bake was the sort of meal your grandparents turned to when they wanted something bold, comforting, and steady enough to feed a full table without spending much at all. It always started with ground beef in a deep pan, blended with onions, celery, and green bell pepper, the holy trinity that shaped countless Southern and Gulf Coast suppers. As the vegetables softened, they melted into the meat, releasing a fragrance that wrapped through the kitchen like memory. Tomatoes, garlic, and a touch of hot sauce followed, giving the dish its quiet heat. The rice was cooked separately, then folded in so it could absorb the seasoned juices before everything baked together. Families loved this meal because it fed many and filled the house with a smell that made the day feel easier. Your grandparents seasoned it by instinct, adding a pinch more spice or a splash more sauce depending on who was coming to dinner. Creole ground beef and rice bake was comfort built from tradition and adapted through necessity, a dish that fed both body and memory. Hog maw stew was a dish that took something most would discard and transformed it into a centerpiece for the table. Hog maw, the lining of a pig's stomach, was cleaned carefully, then stuffed with potatoes, onions, and spices before being simmered until tender. The result was hearty, filling, and deeply flavorful, stretching small amounts of ingredients into a meal that could feed an entire family. In times when money was scarce, hog maw stew allowed families to make use of what they had, proving that nothing from the animal went to waste. It was often served at gatherings where one pot had to go far, reminding everyone of the value of sharing and stretching food. The dish carried cultural roots tied to both survival and celebration, a reminder that even hard times could produce food that comforted and united. Hog maw stew was not fancy, but it represented ingenuity, thrift, and strength in the face of want. Ground beef and cornbread casserole was a Southern invention that understood flavor like few others did. Spicy ground beef went into the bottom of a baking dish, seasoned with onion, chili, and tomato, while a golden cornbread batter was poured on top and baked until puffed and crusted at the edges. When it came out, the smell of corn and spice filled the house. The first spoonful revealed layers, the sweetness of the bread meeting the tangy beef below. It was a meal that cost little but felt abundant, something that could feed a crowd without complaint. The dish was both hearty and clever, turning pantry staples into a centerpiece. It brought together the best of African American cooking: thrift, creativity, and balance between bold spice and gentle sweetness. These casseroles warmed families on cold evenings and left no one hungry. Today, they are a memory of flavor born from necessity, proof that simple food, made right, could hold the heart of a whole generation. Beef and butter bean supper stew was the kind of meal your grandparents made when they needed something hearty enough to last into the next day. It started with browning the beef until it flavored the onions and celery that followed. Butter beans came next, adding a creaminess without needing milk or cream that many families could not spare. Broth, Tomatoes and whatever vegetables needed using went into the pot because nothing was wasted. As it simmered, the beans thickened the broth, turning it into a stew that clung to the spoon. Children dipped bread into their bowls. Adults ate quietly after long days, and everyone felt restored by its warmth. Your grandparents relied on meals like this because they were dependable and adaptable, fitting whatever the week allowed. Over time, the stew became tied to winter nights and small joys shared around the table. Beef and butter bean supper stew was not flashy, but it carried the quiet strength of those who made it. Fried Spam with eggs became breakfast solution when bacon was too expensive and families needed protein to start long days of work and school right. Spam was sliced thick and fried until the edges caramelized and crisped while the center stayed tender, creating textural contrasts that made the processed meat more interesting and actually delicious. Eggs were fried in the same pan, picking up the salty, meaty flavors from the Spam's rendered fat for perfect combination. Together, they created breakfast that provided sustained energy and cost less than 50 cents to feed 4 people every morning. In the 1970s, Spam represented wartime ingenuity that continued helping families stretch food budgets long after rationing ended throughout the country. The canned meat didn't require refrigeration and lasted indefinitely, making it perfect for households with unreliable power or limited storage space available. Fried Spam with eggs represented pragmatism over pretension, showing that feeding your family mattered more than impressing anyone with fancy ingredients or sophisticated cooking techniques. Ground beef and butter bean stew came from the days when you made what you had and made it last. Butter beans simmered slow with beef, onion, and tomato until the pot turned thick and smoky. The beans softened and soaked up every ounce of flavor, creating a meal that was hearty without being heavy. A little salt pork or smoked paprika gave it depth, while cornbread on the side made it complete. This was Depression-era cooking that endured because it worked. It filled bellies, cost little, and tasted like more than it was. Families would gather around steaming bowls after long days, grateful for food that stayed simple and honest. The stew told a story of resilience, one spoonful at a time. Even today, it stands as a reminder that good food has never been about excess. It has always been about heart. Okra and ground beef stew was one of the quiet staples your grandparents relied on during weeks when money was thin, but supper still needed to be hearty. The stew began with browning the ground beef, letting onions soften in its juices until they turned clear and fragrant. Then came the sliced okra, fresh from a garden, or traded from a neighbor who always had plenty. Okra thickened the stew as it cooked, turning the broth rich and velvety without needing anything extra. Tomatoes, peppers, and a bit of broth followed, creating a pot that smelled earthy and warm. Some families added corn or lima beans, others tossed in leftover vegetables that needed to be used. As the stew simmered, the flavors blended into something far deeper than the ingredients alone. Your grandparents ladled it into bowls with pride, knowing it was nourishing, comforting, and built to last. Okra and ground beef stew was a reminder of how families thrived through lean seasons with creativity and patience. Fish head stew was a dish born out of necessity, yet it carried surprising depth and flavor. Fish heads, often discarded by others, were simmered slowly with onions, potatoes, and rice until they yielded every ounce of richness to the broth. My grandmother insisted the heads made the stew better than fillets, providing body and nourishment that nothing else could. The bones and skin flavored the liquid until it turned hearty and comforting. Potatoes stretched the meal, rice thickened it, and vegetables added substance, turning scraps into a filling supper. The taste was strong, earthy, and unforgettable, reminding everyone that no part of food should go unused. For Black families in the 1960s, fish head stew was a common way to stretch the catch of the day, ensuring nothing went to waste. It became a lesson in thrift and gratitude, proof that survival demanded creativity. Fish head stew was both humble and mighty, sustaining families through lean times with flavor and tradition. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and tomato sauce once turned humble ingredients into a dish that looked like celebration. Mothers would hollow out bright green peppers, stuff them with ground beef, rice, and onion, then pour tomato sauce over the top before baking them slow until tender. The smell that rose from the oven was pure comfort, savory, sweet, and familiar. This was dinner that took effort, the kind you started early in the day so it would be ready just in time for family to gather. The peppers softened, the sauce thickened, and the flavors blended into one of those meals that felt like home. They looked fancy but were made from what was on hand. Nothing wasted, everything earned. For many families, it was the taste of pride, proof that thrift could still look beautiful on a plate. Today, they have mostly disappeared from weeknight tables, replaced by quicker meals, but the memory of a bubbling pan of stuffed peppers still carries that same slow-cooked warmth.
Which corned beef and cabbage recipe would you bring back to your table? Drop it in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more forgotten flavors